Welcome to today's discussion on agriculture, beginnings and expansion. So just a couple reminders, this is a video presentation, so if at any point you feel like the video is going too quickly, you have the option to pause, write down your notes, and continue on. So, the Fertile Crescent, which is located in modern-day Iraq, is where we believe to have their first full-blown agricultural revolution. We see remnants of a large variety of plants, and we have a couple theories as to why this huge shift happened. One of the theories is that there was an interruption in the general warming period. What that means is the Ice Age was ending, things started getting warmer, and then at some point it stopped. So large settlements were actually threatened by the loss of wild plants and animals, and so they needed a way to adapt. So therefore they needed to domesticate their surroundings. This transition from hunting and gathering to farming took about 500 years, so it was not an immediate response. We do see, though, a societal sophistication gradually happening, meaning first they created mud bricks, then they started building monuments and shrines with these mud bricks, which led to more elaborate burial systems, and then lastly, more sophisticated tools. So we start seeing the use of metal and metallurgy, or the mixing of metals to create tools and weaponry. In sub-Saharan Africa, though, on the other hand, a different approach was taken. So essentially at this time, the Saharan desert effectively did not exist. So there, animals were domesticated first. And the domestication of cattle happened 1,000 years before the Middle East and India. So in Africa, that's where animals were domesticated first. 1,000 years later, they were domesticated in the Middle East and in India. This is where we see pastoralism. Excuse me. Pastoralism is a society that relies on domesticated animals rather than plants. They still remain nomadic because their herds need to graze on fields, and so as a herd eats all of the nutrients they can from the one field, all of the weeds or plants or whatever they're eating, they need to then relocate to a new area so that their animals can, sustain life. So pastoralists remain nomadic, however they relied on their animals primarily for obviously meat, clothing, food, and then they traded goods with the agricultural societies. So this is where we're going to see the transitioning of technology and information due to pastoralists. This is a very important comp topic. So now if we do a side-by-side comparison of Africa versus Southwest Asia, we see that Africa had scattered farming, although it was not centralized or in one area, and it happened over a vast area. Pastoralism was their primary go-to. However, in Southwest Asia, centralized planned farming occurred, so it was very specific. It was all over in small areas, and there were many plants and animals. In the Americas, however, this is a great pre-comp and comp topic. Agriculture did not take off like it did in the rest of the world. So the Andean, Mesoamerican, Mississippi Valley, the Amazon Basin, they had an absence of beasts of burden. Okay, so animals that would be used for farming. They didn't have cattle, they didn't have horses. Because they didn't have these large animals or beasts of burden, it slowed their agricultural process. They only had llamas and alpacas that were indigenous to the area at this time. They didn't really have protein or fertilizer or power to pull the carts or plows. Yes, they did use manure as fertilizer for their land. So these people relied much more heavily on hunting and fishing more than changing to agriculture. Now that's not to say they didn't have agriculture, they did have farming, but it wasn't on the large scale to sustain large populations like it did in Europe. So for example, we can see how humans have changed plants over time. Maize is a great example. So the only cereal grain that was available at the time in North and South America was maize, or corn, in southern Mexico, from about 4000 to 3000 BC. So we see thousands of years of selective adaptation. So grabbing the kernels of the corn and planting it in different soil that has different nutrients is what transformed corn into what it is today. Arguably, this is man's first and perhaps his greatest feat of genetic engineering. So we didn't change things in a lab, obviously. What we did is we just picked plants and seeds of animals or foods that we liked, and we decided to replant them somewhere else in what would later become more nutritious land with fertile soil. So this is what maize looked like, we believe, about 3000, 4000 BC. And then this should look a little bit more familiar to what it is today. So America versus Eurasia, looking at it from a climate perspective, America's climate is oriented north to south, where in Asia and Europe it is very, very distinctively different. It is east to west. Now we're going to discuss the globalization of agriculture. So agriculture spread one of two ways. Going too a little quick. It either spread through diffusion, which is the gradual spread of techniques and perhaps plants and animals, but without much movement of the human population. What this means is trade was the main component of diffusion. Pastoralists, if you guys remember from previous slides, they were nomadic. So they would move from place to place with their herds. As they moved from place to place, they would need grain for flour, for bread and other essential items that only farming communities could provide for them. So these nomadic herders would go into the village or go into the town. They would exchange goods, so they would sell an animal or a couple animals in exchange for grain and fruit maybe or vegetables. And as they're interacting with one another, they're spreading language, so they might not speak the same language at this point in time, so they're learning to communicate, they're learning different things about each other, and they're exchanging ideas, they're exchanging beliefs, they're exchanging religion, they're exchanging tools. This is how we believe techniques spread, slowly and over time due to trade. The other way that agriculture spread was through colonization or the migration of agricultural peoples, meaning a whole group of people physically picked up their lives, moved somewhere else, and started all over again. Oftentimes, both processes were involved in spreading agriculture. We see the formation of different language groups at this time as well, and we'll talk a little bit more about them as we get into these different topics. Like, for example, when we cover our unit on Africa, we talk a lot more about the Bantu language. But language and culture will spread alongside agriculture. So the Indo-European languages are going to start in Turkey, and they're still spoken today in some form from Europe to India. The Austronesian-speaking peoples, again, from the Philippines and Indonesian islands, still speaking similar dialects to what they originally began. And this dialect is also native to the Pacific Islands. And then lastly, we have the Bantu language, or the Click language, in Africa. Now, there was some resistance to agriculture, whether that was by man or by nature. So, for example, there are just some areas in the world that are not suitable for farming. I'm sure you guys have visited certain areas where, like, wow, nothing is growing out here. Yeah. That's true. There might not be nutrients in the soil. There might not be enough moisture in the air or rainflow. Not rainflow, but just like rain. So land and areas might not be suitable for farming. Also, there was no need to farm if you lived in an area that already had a natural abundance, meaning you naturally had corn growing and grapes growing, or vegetables growing, squash. They already naturally grew, so there was no need for you to replant because Mother Nature essentially took care of it. Areas, for example, where these occurred are in Australia. Australia is super beautiful, but many parts of that continent are actually, it's like not suitable for farming, unfortunately. North America, we have lots of regions that are very abundant. We have a natural abundance of resources already. Another obvious one, the Arctic regions. Not many things grow in the Arctic regions because it's sub-zero temperatures, super cold, things like that. And then southwestern Africa. So there were some people, though, that still committed themselves to hunting and gathering. For example, they still live in our world today, and they primarily hunt and gather. So that's the Hadza and the San. So these are tribes that primarily in Africa that still practice the Paleolithic ancestry of hunting and gathering. So these people freely chose to resist agriculture and instead decided, we're going to stick with hunting and gathering. They believed it was a freer lifestyle for them. So that concludes our discussion on the Paleolithic era. On the Neolithic era. Neolithic means New Stone Age or agricultural revolution. Just keep that in mind. And I will chat with you guys soon.